Since we were here in Istanbul for the previous conference, it's good to be back. And thanks to Altok for organising this and a beautiful venue. I'm very impressed with the quality of the venue here. Thank you. All right, so I noticed that the slides are not projecting. Let's try and fix that. All right, that's better. Okay, I thought because we haven't been here for 5 years, it might be worth just starting with one or two basic concepts. And I noticed that Altok already showed you what a Kanban board is, so perhaps it's irrelevant. But the Kanban method, I started thinking about, didn't know what it was called at the time, but thinking about the idea in 2003 because I saw companies I was working at were failing to scale adoption of Agile methods because the company was full of human beings. And it was possible perhaps to get one department of maybe 30 people using Agile software development and it to be reasonably effective. And then what would happen is a vice president would notice this improvement and say, oh, this is really good. Could you just make that work across the entire business unit of 600 people? And when we tried to do that, the other 570 people resisted the changes. So I quit that job and I went to another company, from a big phone company to the mobile phone. And you know what? Exactly the same thing happened. So by about the middle of 2002 or early 2003, I'd come to the conclusion that large-scale Agile adoption was doomed to failure. The whole concept of dramatic social change that Agile advocates for is fundamentally against the way human beings work. What we really prefer, although there are occasions where dramatic social change is required, there are points in history where countries have rebellions and revolutions and they replace corrupt kings with democratic systems and so forth. And there's a place in the world for dramatic social change. However, it's usually associated with a lot of death, and a lot of violence. And that's not particularly appropriate in the workplace. What we actually want, what social psychologists call incremental change. And in 2003, I came to the conclusion we needed a method that would create business agility using incremental change. However, I came to the conclusion that incremental change wasn't really the right word for it. Because incremental implies we know where we're going and we do one increment and two increments and eventually we arrive at the destination. And actually, as we do changes, new ideas occur. And we do the next change and the next change, and eventually we might end up somewhere, and it's a very good place to be, much improved, but it's not necessarily where we intended to go when we started. Do any of you work at startup companies, or have in your career? Actually very few, surprising. When you started the company, and what you're doing now, do they match? The idea you had at the beginning and what you're doing now, did you incrementally start your company and incrementally move towards the destination, or did the business evolve in a way that you didn't expect? So I started calling it evolutionary change. And then in 2004, I discovered that there was a magic way to catalyze, provoke evolutionary change. And that was through the use of Kanban systems. And these two concepts, the need for evolutionary change that allowed human beings to experience change psychologically and socially in an incremental way, a way that we're capable of coping with mentally. That concept came together with the use of Kanban systems, and that became the Kanban Method. So I started out with some basic principles that we wanted to create better customer service. We wanted businesses where the customers reported, "I'm very happy with what you gave me and how you gave it to me." So we wanted a service-oriented approach. We wanted to focus on managing the work rather than the workers. And we wanted to be able to reflect on how well we were doing on a regular basis and improve in little steps, little increments. So, as we started doing this through 2004, 5 and 6, we ended up with the observation that there were 6 concepts that we were using, 6 abstract practices that I now call the general practices: visualizing otherwise invisible work, limiting the work in progress, focusing on and managing the flow of work from when the customer asked for it until we delivered it, making the policies, the rules, the governance activities, decision-making frameworks, making all of those explicit, implementing feedback loops, because you don't improve without feedback and reflection and thinking about what's working, what's not working, what needs to change. And then finally realizing that we should drive change in a collaborative fashion and in an experimental fashion, and ideally in a model-driven experimental fashion. That it's not random mutation, that we're actually thinking about, if we do this, we expect this result. Okay, let's try it. We made this change in the organisation. Did we get the result we expected? And if not, why not? Should we try again, try a little bit harder, or did we actually think about it the wrong way and we need to change our thinking? So it's the principles of the Kanban method. It was designed to fit human beings. It was designed to create large-scale enterprise agility in a way that works with humans. So, Altog showed you what a Kanban board looks like, so we'll flick through this reasonably quickly. But this is dealing with the first 2 or 3 of those general practices. We're visualizing the invisible work. We're limiting the work in progress, in this case with the numbers on each column, and we're focusing on the flow of the tickets. And it also helps us to make policies explicit. A lot of the ways we're working can be embedded into the visualization, the design of the board, the design of the tickets on the board. We might post some of the other policies on pieces of paper beside the board or attached to the board. Now, there's a critical element that happens when you limit work in progress. It means that the stuff upstream, it's not committed, it's just optional, it's ideas. And when we decide we're going to do something as a very explicit commitment point, now we know that we definitely want it, and we want to get it from this point to the other point as fast as possible without compromising the quality. And while that's easy to say, it's actually quite hard to achieve in an organisation. As soon as you have some WIP limit, people need to decide, what should we be working on now, what should wait until later, and if so, when, and what should we not do at all? That's actually quite stressful if you've never had to do it before. And it's stressful often because people don't know how to make those decisions. We need to teach them methods to help them make those decisions. But once they get comfortable with it, it becomes really quite simple to scale the method. Everywhere in your organization that you can see a service, you build one of these. And even if they interact with each other, that's okay. In fact, it's actually a very elegant solution. It's a service-oriented architecture solution. Everywhere we see a service, we build a Kanban system. And if they have interactions between them that cause perhaps tickets to wait, tickets to be blocked for a while, we can resolve the length of time that the blocks for by adding some feedback mechanism that works at the product unit or the business unit scale, not just at the individual Kanban system scale. A feedback mechanism at the system of systems level. And in the Kanban method, we've defined 7 of these feedback mechanisms. Collectively, we call them the Kanban cadences. The core Kanban meetings down here, but all of these other ones are designed to provoke improvement at different levels in the organization. And we can teach this stuff in 2 to 4 days of training classes, and in theory that should be enough. However, evolutionary change has a psychological problem. In theory it's pretty easy. Here we have a group of people in front of the Kanban board, and this cartoon from the cover of the Kanban book from 2010, it contains all you need to know about evolutionary change. We can see here that these characters, they're holding the Kanban meeting, that's the feedback mechanism. And if we glance at the board behind them, we can see that perhaps things are not in very good shape. The testing appears to be empty, the analysis is heavily overloaded, and the characters aren't having a good time at work. I'm stuck, I'm too busy, I'm idle. And then the 4th character says, you know what, let's do something about it. That's the magic element. This is an act of leadership. Now, if that wasn't present, it would be a therapy session. They all stood at a meeting in the morning and they said, life sucks. Yeah, life sucks. Oh well, back to our desks. Let's get on with it. And nothing would ever get any better. So it turns out the cartoon contains the entire formula. There must be a stressor. There must be a mechanism that creates a little stress, that creates a desire for change, but not too much change. There must be a reflection mechanism so that we can reflect on the stress and reflect on the fact that perhaps we'd like that stress to go away. We'd like to have some change. But there must be an act of leadership to do something about it. So in theory, we had this all nailed down really well in 2010. But it turned out that human beings still struggled with it. Everything was designed to work perfectly with human beings. And the problem was that evolutionary change, barrier to adoption, is human beings, we love to be right. We love to think about something and be correct. We love to be on the winning side of something. We love to support the football team that wins. We like to vote for the party that wins the election, and so on and so on. We love to be right. But it turns out that we're wired up to prefer being wrong rather than uncertain. We absolutely hate uncertainty. So, when we're doing evolutionary change, someone says, where are we going to be in 2 years from now? There wasn't an answer for that question. The answer was, well, we're not really sure, but it will definitely be better than where you are now. And it turns out human beings hate that answer. They would rather be wrong. They would rather buy some very expensive, agile, scaled framework, install it in their organization, spend $20 million on it, discover it doesn't work, but that's better than being uncertain about some evolutionary change that might actually have helped. So we've spent most of the last decade witnessing companies spending millions of dollars being wrong, being happy to be wrong. So, in 2016, I decided that we needed to fix this problem. And the solution is something we call the Kanban Maturity Model. Because what we need is a mechanism to overcome the structural tension, is a term in psychology, that if, say for example, you have a little girl who does gymnastics and she's watching the gymnastics on television, Olympic athletes, and you say something like, you know, one day you could be just like this girl on the television. And she's, I have no idea how I could do that. There's no way to get from here to there. That's structural tension. And the idea of you're promising me that everything will be okay, but I don't really believe you. Another form of structural tension. We had to get rid of the structural tension. We had to provide an incremental roadmap, one step at a time, with some sort of promise that there's a destination. So the Kanban Maturity Model emerged to solve that problem. So the rest of the talk is about what is the Kanban Maturity Model. Well, this little roundel here illustrates the four main pillars of it, that we have to deal with company culture, we have to change the practices we're using, and we're doing that because you want the outcomes that I will describe for you. And to achieve those outcomes, we're going to practice managed evolution. It's not random mutation of your organization, it's managed evolution. We have some concept of what we're doing. We're designing the changes as experiments as we go along. And nowadays we have enough evidence from 15 years of doing this to have a good idea which things should be recommended at each stage. Alright, so we're looking for healthier culture, practices and outcomes through managed evolution. I think we gave you this poster in the bag, right? So I won't spend too much time talking about the poster. What I am going to do is describe the levels in the model, and we'll start with, but first of all, we'll start with culture. Right, so culture, practices, outcomes, I'll get to the levels when we're talking about outcomes. Culture. This gentleman, Lou Gerstner, he used to be the big boss of IBM. I think most of you are old enough to remember when Lou was in charge of IBM. And the two quotes here, this one and the next one, they're from his autobiography after he retired from the job as chairman. Until I came to IBM, I probably have told you that culture was just one amongst several important elements in the makeup of an organization. Success. Along with vision, strategy, marketing, financials and the like. But I came to see in my time at IBM that culture isn't just one aspect of the game, it is the game. Now he's talking about his role as the chairman of the company. Everything else, the strategy, the marketing, the financials, they can be delegated to other people. But if the company is to achieve the success they're hoping for, it needs to have the right culture. And as the chairman, it's his job to set the culture. And as we go around the world and we ask companies, what do you think the obstacles are to achieving business agility or your agile adoption? The most common response is the company culture. Sometimes it's even the country's culture, and a combination of that, the company culture and the country culture. And excuses for failure are normally, well, everything was perfect about our Agile method, it was our company culture that was broken. And unfortunately, excuses don't make things better for people. The fact that failure is explainable doesn't actually help you. So, the second quote here, fixing the culture is the most critical and most difficult part of a corporate transformation. This is Lou Gerstner writing almost 20 years ago. The most difficult thing in a corporate transformation is fixing the culture. So, whatever guidance might publish, whatever we put in fancy books about different methods, if it doesn't give you advice and guidance on how to fix the culture, it's useless. So we have to deal with the culture issue. So next year, in the spring of next year, we will be publishing the second edition of the KMM book with an entire section on culture and how to go about changing it, how to introduce cultural changes in an incremental way. But it's based on the principle that I'm about to show you, the concept of using decision filters. So culture is essentially this combination of, we have some values, things we believe in, things we stand for, things that we identify with, that define us. And those values should be manifest in our behaviour. And behaviour is decisions and actions. Every time we make a decision, every time we take an action, that's behaviour, and those things should be congruent with our beliefs, with our values, with our identity, with who we are, with what defines us. So we need to teach managers and leaders in companies to say, if you believe this to be true, if this is a value that defines you as a business, how do you know whether your decisions and actions are congruent with it? How are you as a leader demonstrating that you live the values you espouse to be part of your business and your objectives? So, this is an updated version of advice I gave my first client in 2008. He was a senior executive at British Telecom, or BT, and he said to me, we're spending millions on Agile, teaching our programmers to do extreme programming and other things. What can we, as an executive team, be doing to help? And I said to him, well, the Agile Manifesto is really meaningless for people at your level. You need to think differently about it. It needs to be reinterpreted for executives. So you have to realize that Agile is about making progress with imperfect information. That you need to prefer action and progress rather than delay, waiting for information and doing yet more planning. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. Your actions need to encourage a high-trust culture. Agile requires a high-trust culture to be successful. And you need to understand what represents high trust and low trust. And we teach this in our training classes, and I'll be publishing my advice, guidance on that next year, along with the culture stuff. And then finally, you need to treat work in progress as though it's a liability rather than an asset. Because if you tell a manager that what they're holding is a liability to the business, they're going to want to get it off their books, pass it along to the next column on the Kanban board. Oh, you've given me a whole bunch of liability, okay, I'm going to get rid of that. When people think the work in progress is a liability rather than an asset, they want to move it as fast as possible out of the organisation. It's a handy way of getting people to pay attention. And no more than 3 bullet points in a decision filter so that people can remember them. And only 2 or 3 decision filters at any given time. So, a year earlier, I was involved in co-authoring an academic paper on lean software development. And one of my co-authors was bemoaning the fact that some quite famous people in the lean movement were teaching things that weren't really very good advice. And that the main thing was they were teaching that lean is all about waste elimination. And he said, no, it's not really. We will pursue value over flow. Value trumps flow. We will expedite something if it's very valuable, even if it delays other things. And flow trumps waste elimination because customers appreciate fast, reliable, predictable delivery more than they care about our cost structure and whether we've eliminated some waste. And those were the first 2. 2 years later, in 2009, I added the third one here, that waste elimination trumps economy of scale. Traditionally in business schools, American business school advice was you drive unit cost down by doing everything bigger factory, bigger batch sizes, economy of scale. So it's better to pursue small batch sizes. And to make small batches efficient, Toyota had discovered you have to drive out the transaction costs and the coordination costs of doing small batches. So you eliminate waste in order to make small scale efficient. So, someone says to you, how do I create a culture for lean in my company? 3 bullet points, simple. How do I create a culture for Agile to be successful in my company? 3 bullet points, simple. The hard bit is saying every time you make a decision or take an action, you need to validate it against those bullet points. And if what you're doing is congruent, then you have created the culture you need to be successful. For every value that we've published in the KMM, we have a decision filter. We will publish them next year. Okay, outcomes. Maturity level 0, we named it oblivious. The organisation's oblivious to the need for a process or any attention paid to the culture or the sociology of the organisation. It's all about my ways, individualism. And every customer has their pet. You know if you're in a level 0 organisation because someone in marketing can pick up the phone, call someone in IT and say, hey, I need four new web pages for the product we're launching next month. Could you just put them together for me and deploy them to production? No governance whatsoever. And while that sounds ridiculous, when I was giving this talk in Brazil about a month ago, I asked the audience how many of you work in a company that sounds like that. 1/3 of the hands went up. It's quite shocking. Level 1, team focused. Now, we would characterise level 1 as never the same way twice. It depends who turned up to work today, how things get done. The process isn't defined. It's not repeatable. When we hire a new person, we don't teach them our processes, we just let them get on with it. And the consequence is that not only is it never the same way twice, the outcomes are unpredictable and the customers are unhappy. Level 1 can also be characterized as individual heroics. When Jerry Weinberg published on this topic in 1997, he described level 1 as the hero programmer level. Now, you know if you work in a level 1 organization because your company runs a job advert that sounds like this: Ninja developer required for dynamic environment. If you're running those job adverts, you're almost certainly a level 1 organization. You need individual heroes because your processes are emergent. That's the polite term. Level 2, customer driven. It's never the same result twice. So at level 2, we now know how to do things. We have a process for getting them done. And when some new person is hired, we teach them the process. So we can actually draw a Kanban board with lots of columns across it, and tickets come in one end and they flow through to the other end. The problem is that the time they take to flow is entirely unpredictable, and sometimes the quality popping at the other end also isn't as good as it needs to be. So while the customer experience is better than level 1, it's still not good enough. And level 2 can be characterized as managerial heroics. Because when a customer really needs something, they need it in a hurry or they need it done to a high level of quality, a manager personally ensures that it works its way through the process and comes out the other end and the customer is happy. So you know you're in a level 2 organization when you sit in a meeting with the customer and they name the project manager that they want, because they don't trust any of the other bozos who work in the PMO. Only if Jessica's running my project can I be sure it will be delivered on time. I trust Jessica to make it happen. Right? The hero manager, level 2. Level 3 is when all of that goes away, that we're now fit for purpose. That the customer says, yes, I'm happy, they deliver what I expect almost all of the time. That we have a known way of doing things and that we meet customer expectations regularly. And now there are no more heroes anymore. You'll recognize that if you've been level 1 or 2 for many decades and you reach level 3, there's a deep psychological and sociological problem you have to deal with. You have a building full of heroes, and they're not needed anymore. And they don't like that very much. It's an identity crisis. But I'm a ninja developer. And you might find some of the ninjas leave the company and find a job somewhere else in a more chaotic environment where they feel more comfortable. And perhaps that's the right outcome, even if you love those individuals. Level 4, risk hedged. Not just is the customer happy, but everyone's happy now. You could be level 3, happy customers, you could be losing money on every transaction, and eventually the money runs out, and that causes you to regress back to level 2 or 1. You could be creating happy customers, but you might be breaking the law. You might be forgetting about regulation that's important in your industry. And eventually the authorities will catch up with you if you don't fall into line. To be a truly sustainable and robust business, you need to keep all of the stakeholders happy. Everything has to be in balance, there needs to be fairness. And therefore, we have to aspire to create level 4 companies, to be truly long-term sustainable, to have superior economic results, happy workers, happy customers, all our other stakeholders are happy, and we can keep doing that. If you achieve this, you will almost certainly be one of the greatest destination employers in your region. Level 5 is the market leader, simply the best. Now, we associate level 5 with highly competitive industries and highly ambitious companies. So Formula One motor racing, for example. And not every company in a market needs to aspire to be level 5. In Formula One, who aspires to be the best? Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull. Now the Sauber team, which is now called Alfa Romeo, they don't really think they're ever going to win the championship. Success for Sauber is showing up and being in the show. Maturity level 4 is good enough. Maturity level 5 is what needs to be present at Mercedes, at Ferrari, at McLaren, at Red Bull. And it's the world of marginal gains, because motor races are won or lost by fractions of a second. Thousandths of a second determine the starting position on the grid. So there's an obsessive attention to every detail at level 5. There won't be very many level 5 companies. Now, level 6, the concept of built for survival, reinvention, is the ability to continually challenge everything about the business. Not just the how we do things and the what we're doing, but also the why we exist and the who we are as a company. Because from time to time, companies have to completely reinvent themselves if they're going to survive. When IBM was founded, it was originally called CTR, the Computing and Time Recording Company. And what they made, their main product, were time punch card machines. So workers would come to the factory, they would take their own personal card out of the slot, they would stick it in the punch machine that would punch the time they started working, and they would put it in the slot on the other side. That was IBM's main product. And at some point in history, 1960s, that product wasn't high-tech anymore. And they reinvented themselves as a mainframe manufacturer, computing mainframe manufacturer. Lou Gerstner reinvented them as a professional services company, and if you paid attention, over the last 2 or 3 years, they announced they're exiting the mainframe business completely. Just like previously, in the 1970s, they exited the time recording business. If the company is to survive in the very long term, the why it exists and the who it is, its identity, have to be changed, and it requires really great leadership for that to happen. You could have a business for 40 years and you don't need this. But from time to time, if you want to survive through the next generation, you need great leadership, and the company needs to go through dramatic social change. Lou Gerstner spent 1.5 to 2 years firing 1,500 people every week. And then when they started to pivot into the new identity, they spent 2 years hiring 1,500 people every week. They churned out over 200,000 employees in 5 years. Dramatic social change. Sometimes it's necessary. So, key message here, it's the organisation that matures, it's not the Kanban that matures. We're talking about organisational maturity with the Kanban Maturity Model. What's challenging for Kanban is to know what's the appropriate way to do Kanban depending on what level your company is. Right, so let's talk about practices. The Kanban Maturity Model, it primarily exists to drive appropriate application of Kanban practices. If you try to do maturity level 4 practices in a level 1 organisation, they will choke on it and spit it out. They'll hate Kanban. So, we've recognised 2 key failure modes in Kanban adoptions over the last decade. The first one is what I just described, and I refer to that as the smartest guy in the room problem. You hired a consultant, and that consultant has read a lot of web pages and some books and watched videos and attended conferences and maybe some training classes, and they want to show off how smart they are because you're paying them an expensive fee. So they design you a wonderful level 4 maturity Kanban to show off how smart they are, and then you can't stomach it. And your organisation spits it out and you fire the consultants. It's a failure to install problem. And then the other problem we see is where perhaps there wasn't a smartest guy in the room involved, and instead people said, oh, Google Kanban, how do we do it? And they find some web page or a small video, and they think, oh, some sticky notes on the wall, now we're doing Kanban. And therefore they will say, we've done Kanban and it helped us. And they think they're finished with Kanban and maybe they need to something else in order to get better, change things to the next level. This is the false summit plateau problem. So the Kanban Maturity Model prevents both of these failure modes. More than 150 practices have been mapped against it on the big poster. You can download that from kanbanmaturitymodel.com. And the key message from this part of the talk is, there's no such thing as bad Kanban, there's just inappropriate practice selection. That if you're struggling with Kanban, it's probably because of a mismatch between the practices you're using and your organisational maturity. Or if you're doing Kanban but nothing's getting any better, it's also the same thing. You've picked practices that are too simple, they're not creating any stress. So the maturity model illustrates all of this and maps them to the 7 levels. And this is the big poster which you can download. And obviously you can't read the individual practice mappings. Now we developed these practice mappings by studying real world case studies. People who came to our conferences and presented, places where we'd send people to spend time in a company and write a formal case study. So it's evidence-based. We looked at the company's culture, the outcomes they were producing, the quality of the leadership, and we looked at how are they doing Kanban. We also have a lot of case studies where a company started at a very low maturity level and gradually they got better, and you can see the changes happening and you can see their Kanban implementation evolving and getting deeper and better. So, to summarise the outcome and practices part, levels 0 through 2, it's an unfit for purpose organisation. The customers are unhappy and so are many of the other stakeholders. The primary benefit at levels 0, 1 and 2 is happier workers. Workers who are relieved of overburdening, who can focus better on quality, who feel better about themselves individually. Then at level 3, the customers love us, but it could be potentially unstable. And then level 4, 5 or 6, the customers and every other stakeholder loves us, and we have a stable, robust, sustainable business for the long term. As I said earlier, therefore our aspiration has to be to create a lot of level 4 maturity companies. Now in the physical world, in the tangible goods industries, manufacturing, distribution, hospitality for example, many companies are already at this level or better. The challenge we have in the 21st century is that most professional services businesses, intangible goods businesses, knowledge worker businesses, they're at maturity level 1. Most of the market we see, most of the Kanban implementations in the world are maturity level 1. So, if we're going to make a significant difference, not just to the economy, but to the lives of human beings in the 21st century, well-educated professionals working in the intangible goods industries around the world, people like you, then we need to help you bring your companies up to organizational maturity level 4. And we're going to do that with our managed evolution approach. The whole idea that we start with where you are now and we help you evolve. Right, so talking about the maturity model, one of our trainers from London was giving a talk at a conference, and he got to the end, and one of his clients came up and said, "Oh, we really love this concept, and we love maturity level 4. We'd love a bit of level 4. We think we're level 2, that's code for we know we're level 1, but we are not comfortable admitting it. We think we're level 2, and we'd like you to take us to level 4. Please, Mr. Consultant." Now, a traditional consultant would therefore look up the map and say, oh, these are all the things we need to do at level 4, and plan a transition initiative. So current processes and methods are at level 1, take us to level 4, design, manage, change initiative, bang, now we're at level 4. It's the Captain Picard School of Management. It's a plot course for maturity level 4, work factor 3, make it so, Mr. Sulu. Different pilot, right? I'm not a Star Trek guy. Okay, so this is the way it works. Traditional consulting, this is our current capability and we're not happy with it. This is where we want to get in the future. And in order to do that transition, things are going to get worse before they get better. And the question for you folks is, what's the tolerance in your organisation for things to get worse before they get better? How much worse can they get before people panic? And then the second problem is, how long does it take before you start to see the vector of improvement? This is patience. How patient is your organisation? And it turns out that tolerance and patience correlate to organisational maturity. There's a concept in psychology, sometimes it's just called resilience. So if we stress someone, how resilient are they? How much stress before we break them and they turn into a homeless person? But in a more formal way, it's called ego strength. The stronger the ego, the more stress someone can suffer, the deeper the crisis can be, and they can bounce back from it, they can recover. And organisational maturity is effectively capturing the concept of ego strength for a company. A low maturity organisation has very low resilience. If you're level 1 maturity, your tolerance for things to get worse and your patience before they have to get better is very small. And this explains why this style of traditional change management, the traditional consulting style, actually this approach invented by McKinsey, the original Mr. McKinsey, for whom the company is named after. All the other consulting companies copy his model. And what happens is, because there isn't enough resilience, there isn't enough tolerance and patience to wait for it to get better, if it is going to get better at all, then there's panic and the change agent gets fired. And then usually there's some misdirection to cover it up. We do a reorganization. Maybe we fire the vice president who hired the consultants, and we start all over again. So if you're in a low maturity organisation, you actually need to do change like this, a little bit at a time. Install some basic Kanban, look up the maturity model for level 1 or 2, and start small and gradually evolve to get better. And as you get better, and as your organisational maturity improves, as your ego strength, as your resilience improves, you can do bigger and bigger changes because you're more tolerant and more patient and more confident you know what you're doing. Now, we've codified the stressors and the reflection mechanisms, and next year I'm publishing the codification for the leadership, the culture stuff and other leadership practices, so that you can look up the map. And we've organised the KMM. Each level has sub-levels called transition and consolidation. If we look at the idea here, say we're at level 1, it's a happy equilibrium that we're in. We're kind of happy being pathetic. But maybe there's some change agent who thinks we need to do better. Well, we need to insert some practices there to disrupt that equilibrium. We need to make people a little bit unhappy with the current status quo. We need to give them some frustration that the current condition isn't good enough. But perhaps they're fearful of the future and where we're going. In social psychology, this state is known as inertia. That we don't like where we are, but we are really scared to make the changes that could be necessary to go to the new place. And therefore, the consolidation level contains the hard practices that require some coaching in order that we can consolidate down to the next level. There's a lot of material on the slide, and there's a lot more material in the training class for it. But we now understand how to insert some practices that are easy to do, don't invoke a lot of resistance, but they make people unhappy enough to come and say, we really need to do something about this. What should we do? And the what is in the next sub-level. with a bit of coaching to get over the anxiety, we get those new practices installed and the whole organization's moved from level 1 to level 2. And now all you have to do is rinse and repeat. Start at level 1, move to level 2, now you're at 2, move to 3, 3, move to 4. And the whole way we've had a map. We've had information that helps us move from one to the other. Now, I don't have a lot of time left, so just quickly I'm going to show you some examples of transitions from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. If we have time, we'll do the 3 to 4. This is an Agile coach at an internet equipment manufacturer in the United States. Took me out into the corridor and whispered this to me. Every team reports that they deliver on their commitments, but I know that customers are waiting longer than 6 months for delivery. They've got isolated teams who don't cooperate with each other. Individual scrum teams with little scrum boards, moving things from their sprint backlog into their done column. And then who knows how long it waits before the next team picks it up and does something, and it gradually works its way along through a workflow. So we might see boards that look like this. And what's wrong here is there's a lack of service orientation, there's localized metrics and objectives, there's no customer recognizable work items, there's a lack of cooperation and collaboration across the workflow. They're just focused in their own little team world. Screw the rest of you. So what we need to do here is implement what we teach in the basic Kanban class, the system thinking approach to introducing Kanban. It's a series of exercises to get people to recognize who are our customers, what do they ask us for, what do we do to it, where does it go, to build maturity level 2 and 3 Kanban systems. So customer recognizable work item types, a service-oriented workflow board, and a feedback mechanism called a system capability review. And that will bring us to a board that looks like this. And now we have multiple teams cooperating together to actually flow work through with an understanding that we have a customer and they asked us for something. We have moved from maturity level 1 to 2. And why would we care? Well, some big companies have achieved this. This one refers to a Chinese telecom equipment manufacturer. At the time we got the data, they had 5,500 people doing Kanban like this, 14 product units, and they had been able to measure, because they're sufficiently well instrumented to have a baseline, a 25 to 50% productivity improvement. And they claimed that this had reduced the need to recruit 1,200 engineers. The return on investment on the 3 years implementing Kanban was 30,000%, just on the cost saving of the extra staff. Now there are barriers to level 2. In the interest of time, I'll skip over the list, but we've codified this in the second edition of the book. We will be publishing that so that you can look up what are the things that are going to get in our way and evaluate whether that's likely in your company. Level 2 to 3. I haven't looked at the lead time chart in months. Software development manager at that same telecom equipment manufacturer. Now, why would a manager not bother looking at how long it was taking for a customer request to be delivered? What does that tell us about what's going on? Just this one sentence in the meeting told me pretty much everything I need to know to diagnose this problem, right? Is there a service delivery manager role present? Has somebody actually been responsible for taking the customer's order and ensuring it gets delivered? Are customer expectations understood and communicated? Is there a service delivery review happening? So the reflection mechanism, system capability review, it matures into service delivery review, where we ask, who's the customer, what were our expectations, have we met those expectations? And you know what? Delivery time's going to be an expectation. I don't think I ever met a customer who didn't care how long it was going to take. Right? Is there any blocker management? Is there blocker likelihood and impact being reported? In other words, are we paying attention to tickets that get stuck? Is there a risk review? There's a little bit exotic language here, but it's the lead time distribution thin or fat-tailed. If we did have a lead time distribution, we have it, but we're not looking at it. There's a big long fat tail telling us that we're unpredictable. If so, we need to deal with that. So what needs to be implemented here is the service delivery manager role, the service delivery review, some blocker metrics, the risk review, and we need to define customer expectations as their fitness criteria. What is it that's going to make the customer happy? And let's target that. And that will bring us to a proper Kanban board that looks like this. Now the economic benefits are stunning. The case studies from the early ones from 2005 and 6 and 7 to more recent ones, scale 6 to 150 people typically, 100 to 250% productivity improvement. In other words, getting from level 2 to level 3 produces an 8-fold improvement. That's stunning. And lead times reduced by up to 90%. This number of 90%, 91, 92, 89, 88, 87, it keeps coming up again and again and again in the case studies. Imagine what it does to your business if you can deliver to customers 10 times faster, if you can cut 150 days down to 15 days. And yet, this is routine for us. We've codified how to do it. Level 3 to 4. We just put a release out on time, met our commitments, but our product management team reacted with a WTF is this. Now this specifically was a mobile application in Berlin, and they had a successful iPhone app, and they decided they were going to introduce an Android app. And the first release of the Android app created a reaction from marketing, which was, what the heck? Who the hell chose these features? And the team responded with, but everything's on our Kanban board. Why didn't you say something sooner? And the customer responded with, we don't know what the heck anything on that board means. Right. Work items weren't meaningful and understood by the customers. They had something we call asynchronous commitment. The customers basically unloaded everything they wanted into a big buffer called a backlog, and the programmers came along and they just cherry-picked out of the backlog whatever they felt they wanted to work on. Now, it wasn't just random. They were thinking about it and trying to do their best, but it wasn't what the business people were expecting. So we implement a two-tiered Kanban board, new coarse-grained work item type called a feature, and when we commit to a feature, all the user stories for that feature have to flow through the lower level of the board. Synchronous commitment, let's put the customer in the room with the delivery people so that this is what we want, okay, we'll do that for you, and it's a feature, we understand what it is. Full replenishment meeting with the customer present, and customers commit to those features. And that gives us boards that look like this, two-tiered Kanban boards. Green tickets for the features, yellow tickets for the user stories. And we start to see more sophisticated boards at maturity level 4. which I'll skip over in the interest of time. Economic benefits. Well, we don't have so many case studies for this sort of level, but a couple of them that are well known. One was published in IEEE Management, that's a peer-reviewed academic journal, from the BBC's worldwide website, and the other one's from Hewlett-Packard's laser printer firmware division, where they dropped the lead time on a new generation of laser printers from 21 months to 3.5 months. Think how revolutionary that was for Hewlett-Packard's business in 2006. That's stunning. Both of these companies reported 700% productivity gains, and Peter Middleton validated that at the BBC. David Joyce, his co-author, worked at the BBC at the time. So there is potentially a 4-fold improvement from level 3 to level 4, and between level 1 and level 4 there is a 32-fold improvement at least. We can make a big difference to the economy of the world in the 21st century if we can get this stuff to scale out across organizations. So, the Kanban Maturity Model, culture, practices and outcomes through managed evolution. And let the maturity model and the map of practices be your guide. It provides this roadmap that overcomes the anxiety of the uncertainty of where are we going. We've found a way to make managed evolution actually work with human beings. And you can learn more about this from kanbanmaturitymodel.com. You can download sample chapters of the book, case studies from BBVA in Spain, and Vanguard, an insurance company in the United States. And with that, thank you all very much. I have no idea what's happening now.
Thanks so much. Do you have a question, David?
No questions? I didn't know we had time for questions.
Hi, maybe I missed because of the language barrier, but I would like to ask, how do you assess the organization's maturity level? How are you aware of it? And how do you take the data from that organization?
So, the people I work with on this, particularly Teodora Bozeva, my co-architect and co-author, she is working on a formal appraisal mechanism. But the purpose for the appraisal mechanism is because companies want some kind of official badge that says how they're doing. If they've been spending time and energy and money on improving, making changes, they want a scorecard. They want to be able to say, we were level 2, we've now achieved level 1, we were level 1, we've now achieved level 2, and they want the reassurance of us issuing some kind of certificate that says that. But in a less formal way, it doesn't take a lot of evidence to figure out the maximum level a company can be at. So just a single piece of behaviour like a development manager isn't looking at a lead time chart tells us that they cannot possibly be level 3, because we know enough, we have enough experience to know that customers always care about delivery time, and if managers in the company don't care about delivery time, it is highly probable that they don't deliver on time. So it's quite easy from just a few pieces of evidence to eliminate and say, oh, they can't possibly be level 5, they can't be level 4, they can't be level 3, and that leaves us with they're only level 0, 1 or 2, and then you need a few more bits of evidence. So in the book, the second edition of the book next year, we will be describing that sort of qualitative assessment method, but there is a more formal and more quantitative method for formal appraisals, and it's being trialled. I want to say it's more of an alpha test at the moment with 2 or 3 hand-picked clients. Then there'll be some sort of bigger beta period. So we're a little bit of time away from our formal appraisal method. Another question here, you want to wait for the microphone?
Yeah, quite simply, can you talk a little bit about how you're measuring productivity?
Oh, so the productivity numbers refer simply to the number of tickets being completed, on the assumption that the organisation, we're not using it as an improvement driver in the organisation, we're not setting targets. So if people have not been measured against it, they're not gaming it in any way. So we're just observing, we made a bunch of changes, how many tickets are being finished. So that the BBC report, they were looking at change requests for the websites. Hewlett-Packard were tracking things like the number of features they were implementing in the firmware, the number of bugs they were fixing in the previous release of the firmware, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Thank you so much for speaking.
All right. Thank you.